Farmer Tom here. Welcome to the Farmer Tomcast. And as a part of my ongoing series, Heroes of the Green, we have Chandra Batra, who's a well-known activist in the cannabis community and a favorite of mine. Hello, Chandra. How are you doing?
Hi, Uncle Tom. It's been an awesome weekend. It's great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you too. Can you tell the world who you are? The world wants to hear. Go ahead.
Sure. I'm Chandra Batra. Or Chandra Lavette Batra. I'm a long-term cannabis activist as well as the stepdaughter of a cannabis grower and a founding member of Mass Can as well as Mass Patients Advocacy Alliance and a member of the MRCC. I actually helped to see cannabis go all the way from illegal when I most needed it when I first got diagnosed with fibro at 19, all the way to full legalization and honoring of the rights of people of color in the state. So it's been a really long trip, but it's been most of my life, but it's been worth it. I was born not breathing. I was born to a severely asthmatic mom who was a Black civil rights activist. My mother was an activist during the 1960s. She was actually one of the founding members of the Harlem Breakfast Program in New York, as well as being a member of the March on Washington with Martin Luther King, and a voting rights activist, and someone who got arrested in Wilmington, North Carolina about 15 times before she went to college. So I come from a long line of pure-blooded civil rights activists, and cannabis from its inception has been a racist war. Unfortunately, in 1974, my uncle Walter Clemens came back from Vietnam, and he had severe injuries because he had birth injuries just like my mom, but he wasn't severely asthmatic. He had musculature issues and nerve issues that they didn't have any answer for until probably around the 1970s, because medicine in this country has been stifled as well as a lot of other research because of this cannabis prohibition. And the sad thing is all the medical stifling of medical fat to doctors about how the endocannabinoid system actually interacts with the nervous system. And so he died in 1974, and he was an underground cannabis healer who was actually getting people out of the VA. He would show up there with bags of weed and just give it away because that was the person he was. And so he started sneaking me weed when I was about 6 because I was in really, really bad pain because I was born with no bones. I was a poor little girl who was born not breathing and without any bones, and I couldn't walk until it was about 5, honestly, even though I was forced to walk. I was in a great deal of pain. I was one of the kids that my parents paid for $100 cab rides around New York, so I'd just shut up and go to sleep when I was a really, really tiny baby. So I was born with full-out endocannabinoid EDS, which is what Dr. Machulam calls it. And I actually got to meet him when I went to the very first Unity conference for Americans for Safer Access. So my struggle for cannabis has been my personal struggle, and also my family's struggle, because unfortunately, being born working middle class Black in this country, 1 in 4 people who are arrested for weed, unfortunately, are people of color. And my youngest baby brother got caught up at a really young age because he was born severely autistic. See, my mom had 3 kids. She wasn't supposed to have any, and she wasn't supposed to live past the age of 18. So she had 3 of us before she died, and my youngest brother was only 2 years old when my mom died. So he grew up, he was nonverbal autistic, and so he was born. So when he got to go to regular school as a teenager, he got into the bad crowd and the bad kids, and then he ended up a Crip and dealing and just making like money hand over fist because he was a charismatic person. Unfortunately, Perbil is still in jail right now. He's been in jail on and off since he was 14, and he's 45 now. And that's one of the main reasons that I'm fighting still for cannabis in the state. They're still illegally arresting Black kids in our state. I don't know how it is in other legal states, but it's gotten a lot more ridiculous out on the streets. So that's the huge part. That's why when I was that's why when I was and after my mom died, we had a really, really hard life. My dad wasn't emotionally ready to be a parent, so he didn't take custody of my two youngest brothers after my mom died, and I ended up on the street because everybody thought I was fine because my cousins were my legal guardians and had that written on paper. Unfortunately, what they didn't tell people is that they stole that money to be my guardians so they get money from New York from the foster care system. And we were all homeless from the time I was 12 until I was 19. But my cousins dropped out of my life by the time I was 14. And that's when the stupidity happened in a bad way. On top of my uncle who died being a good underground cannabis grower, my really evil stepdad who died in 1989 was also an underground cannabis grower. And he got involved in the heroin trade as well as the skin trade. He was also my perpetrator. I'm a survivor of childhood incest as well as child sex trafficking. So from the time I was 14 to the time I was 18, I was out there selling myself for $200 a day because I was a junkie. And unfortunately, my being a heroin addict was a really, really horrible time in my life. I mean, I was a homeless street kid in the 1980s. And there are romantic movies that have been written about that period. They're including the movie Kids. It's like, how did we all survive? Well, we survived because I basically raised a squat full of children on my own and was their mother figure as well as the semi-adult in their life, because I remember everything my mom taught me about how to be an adult and how to live your own life, because she didn't know when she was going to die. And she started giving me lessons on being a grown-up by the time I was 7. And but I wasn't ready for all of the responsibility. So unfortunately, I became a heroin addict. And when I was 19, my real dad finally pulled his emotional shit together, stopped being so much of an active alcoholic. He ended up dying of a heart attack when I was 30. The rest of the story is that this shadows a lot of the rest of the story at this point, because at 18 I ended up coming into Boston in 1989, and I helped my then Dom, who I'm also into BDSM. Hi, all my kinky friends. But then I ended up coming here because of my Dom and because my dad pulled enough money together for me to leave New York and to actually go to drug rehab. At the time in New York, there was a 3 strikes and you couldn't go back to rehab for 5 years rule. I'm happy in a lot of ways about the way the heroin crisis is being handled right now, because they did a really shitty job until white kids ended up on the street. Because back until around the middle to late 90s, they gave no fucks about junkies. And I was one. And I can proudly say I'm an ex-junkie. And so I ended up going to rehab in Boston. I helped found MassCan. I helped us to get decrim passed in the state. And I worked with and the very first people I met who had cannabis were people who were really interested less in my civil disobedience side and more in my patient side. And that's how we actually founded a network of underground caregivers who actually took care of children in the state. Our state losing caregivers is a huge blow, and it's still not been rectified by the CCC. And we're still fighting night and day. But basically from there, I went to college. I had to take care of my dad because my dad slowly drank himself to death, which kind of colored a lot of my life until my 30s. And after my dad died, I ended up homeless because I also am autistic and I have my own severe pain issues. So I had to go on SSI when I was 30, and I haven't worked since my dad died because it's really hard to work and be a paying patient and have to worry about money. It's a mess. My real life isn't fun. I mean, I have fun when I go to cannabis events. I have fun with you guys, but my real life is is not fun. And part of the not fun part is the fact that our state has no compassion to cannabis. So I haven't been able to pull my health or my life together in a real way because I've been in severe pain. And we're struggling as patients in the state. We seriously are. And the CCC keeps proving that it wants money instead of people. And all too many horrible ways. This cannabis game has become a game of late stage empire based cannabis corporatism and capitalism. And we really need to fight against all of this bullshit. And we need to come together as a family. So